I interviewed with Amazon in 2003. That was my only big tech experience. I went through 8 interviews with them. And I had a company in Chicago offer me a job after one interview.
Welcome, Benjamin. You recently wrote about ignoring tech influencers. So, should we ignore tech influencers?
It's a good question. I think it depends. I hate the it depends answer, but I really do think it does. Oftentimes, because it depends on their intention, where they're coming from. I think a lot of times tech influencers are like a lot of other influencers. The industry has popped up with, look at me, pay attention to me. I'm generating followers. I'm accruing lots of likes and lots of engagement. But does that really mean that person has got the background, the credentials, the criteria to be able to speak honestly about that, about whatever it is that they're speaking on? I have some skepticism. I'm kind of a natural skeptic, I think, by default. I think a lot of technologists are, and I think influencers are worth paying attention to if you're able to do some fact checking, deep diving, and maybe looking through more of their body of work as opposed to looking at just one individual article or video or podcast.
So, when you're looking at their body of work, how do you judge their intention and how do you figure that out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I will stalk follow people around. I mean, you can navigate somebody's post history, right? And you can find them on, if it's LinkedIn, you can find them on X, or you can find them on Facebook, or you can find them in articles. A lot of times I tend to follow people that I've either seen at conference, know through other people who are like, you really should be following this individual. They speak very highly in this area. Occasionally I will have somebody kind of fly across my feed. And then I'll go back and kind of look at their post history. I'll pay attention to what they've been saying for a while. I'm really looking for authenticity. I'm not looking for somebody that is throwing products and ideas and solutions, and then 3 months later, they're on to something else. I think humans progress in ways that kind of meander from A to B, right? You'll see somebody's evolution and growth in their thinking if you go back and you look at what they've written or spoken or talked about. And so if I come across somebody new, that's what I do. I'll start digging on just looking at what they've written, what they've said, who they affiliate with, what brands they might even be affiliating with, right? And then I can then draw on my own personal experiences to say, hey, I've had a positive experience with this brand or this individual, and it starts to kind of develop this affinity toward that individual. So I don't think that there's an exact science. I think it's really more hardwired into how you even evaluate trustworthiness in actual human relationships.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult topic.
Mm-hmm.
And like everything else in social media, it gets a bit polarized.
It does.
There are now people that immediately jump to, I don't trust you because you said something that I think is clickbaity, or something like that, without actually then looking at, as you say, the background. They just jump to that assumption. So we've kind of ended up with that polarization, which is quite a challenge. So how do you then deal with somebody like me? I mean, I pride myself on strong opinions weakly held.
Mm-hmm.
So I will pivot on a dime. I will post or share or argue in a debate with you that, I don't know, the sky is blue, or maybe let's try that different. The sky is green today. And then you can get me go outside and see it's blue. And 10 seconds later, you've shown me the data, the sky is blue. I'm prepared to pivot that quickly. How do you judge somebody then that does that?
You mentioned loosely held, right? I think that as new information, and you can see this in people's thought, as new information comes in, somebody will say, hey, yesterday I held this opinion. I have then since learned or been pointed towards or evaluated something else. Scratch that. I feel differently today, and here's why. I think it's the logical approach, and for me, very much, and especially being in technology, the science part of it. If there's data that kind of backs that somebody's intentions or beliefs or feelings are changing based upon what they've learned, it's hey, yesterday I was all in on X, tomorrow I'm all in on Y, and then I discover that Y was like secretly giving some kind of a kickback for that opinion change, that feels a little different to me than, hey, I thought that I didn't like Y. I spent the weekend with Y. Man, I was blown away, right? I really didn't buy into, let's just pick AI. I didn't buy into AI. I tried Chat GPT. It was terrible, but then Claude Code changed my mind because of what I was able to do with it. I think that when you're looking at influence and even looking at just human relationships, for me personally, my filter is based around how truthful and authentic you are. Are you being true to who you are? And that criteria is who you are is very innately personal, I think. And so that's my personal stance. So like, I love like reading your opinions because I see you change and as you learn and as you're evaluating things. And I think that you do it from a stance of, hey, I learned this, or I tried this, or I've evaluated this, not just I jumped because I was getting asked to jump.
Yeah, I've always prided myself and tried to align my ego with learning. So if I've learned more today and I know more today than I did yesterday, that's a success. Including if I learn I was completely wrong yesterday.
Yes.
I've grown. That to me is benefit and I'm better. So what if I was wrong yesterday? I now know more. That's better. That's a win. I've progressed. I've grown, whatever terminology you want to put on that. One of the challenges I have with that is we talk a lot as software engineers about being data-driven and making data-driven and looking at the data. And every so often I'll post something and people will come and ask for sources. I pretty much ignore any requests for sources because never once have I posted the sources and had somebody go and read them and then come back and change their mind. I find that we're terribly bad at being data-driven as software engineers. What's been your experience of that?
I tend to have a very similar opinion to what you do in the learning, the daily learning. I've always felt knowledge is free, right? It's like you can go look up, you can go study how to do X, Y, and Z. People don't pay me because I have book knowledge, right? I don't have a job because I have book knowledge. But I do find that a lot of our industry does desire to have things fed and kind of given in a direction. And I don't feel that, in my experience, you have a handful of people in your career, I think, that you come across. So maybe it's a large handful, maybe it's a small handful, depending on how far along you are, that really are voracious about gathering knowledge, getting better. We like to talk about this term called craftsman, right? I think is an interesting term. I think some people might liken building software as if it's some kind of an artisan thing, right? Where I'm building this unique craft. But I find most people generally just want to take their story points off the board, do their sprint, do their 3 stories, check them in, run CI/CD if it's enabled, and ship their stuff every 2 weeks. I also tend to find that people in tech are very much like people on Facebook. They're going to follow whatever things move, right? Whatever's popular in that moment, most people are going to stay in that space because that's just the nature of humanity, I think, is that we're going to stay where it's safe. We're going to swim in big lanes. And to go outside that bubble and really do that digging and be data driven, as you said, is it's difficult and sometimes it's lonely. But I think that there's a ton of growth that happens in the loneliness, and you find other people like yourself that are out there searching for the same things.
Yeah, I think that's a facet of human nature, shall we say, that we follow the fashion. We want to be part of the tribe. We're social animals. We want to follow the herd, or whatever analogy you want. You mentioned craftsman there. I go back and forward on this whole idea of software engineering because, again, software engineering, to my mind, should be data-driven. We're trying to be an engineering discipline in that, so we're going to try and apply a scientific approach to building software. Then we have the whole of movement that talks about craftsmen. And I find myself aligning a little bit to that because we're not engineering when we build software because we argue about languages. We argue about tabs versus space and Emacs versus Vi. My dad is, as I use the phrase, a real engineer. Or at least was before he retired. He built railways. And there's not an argument about whether 44,000 kilovolts will kill you.
Yes.
It just does. It's physics.
It is.
They don't get into argument, and they don't argue about whether or not you should run a train on DC or AC, and there's just simple physical laws and engineering discipline and facts that are well established and standards. we're missing a lot of that in software engineering.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should have more of it. And I find myself pushing back against a lot of the AI movement at the moment, saying, like, for example, in Boss Journey from Claude Code says, coding is solved, software engineering won't exist in 6 months. Well,
Right.
software engineering isn't coding, that's part of it.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
To me, if we're going to describe ourselves as software engineers, then we do the whole discipline from what is the problem to here's a delivered solution, and if it's something in production, we then support it and keep it running. Where Craftsman seems a little bit more like, I'm going to take a piece of wood and shape it, or I'm going to take a bit of clay and mold it, which I think a lot of us felt we were doing with coding, but it's not the whole job. So I guess that brings us right away back to what you said, as some people want to take their free tickets off the board, do them, deliver it, and go home. Maybe that's part of the tension is, some of us live to work, some of us work to live, some of us have interests and passions outside of work.
Right.
Where do you stand on that then, craftsman versus engineering?
Man,
do you think there's a change coming in our industry, or are we just recognizing that we're all very different and have different goals?
I struggle with the term software engineer, have for years. I've always just been a programmer. It's just because it's easier just to describe myself as, engineering to me. I was a mechanical engineer in college for a little while. That was a real discipline. My wife is an accountant and a CPA. She has professional education that she must continue. My father was a geologist. My brother is an atmospheric scientist. Very physical disciplines. Well, again, to your point, like your father, I do think there are a lot of scientific disciplines and things that go into the software experience. I tended to kind of align more toward craftsman early on in my career because I felt that there was more art than science to a lot of things that I was doing. But now as AI has kind of happened, I do find myself, I don't write very much code at all, but I ship more value than I did. And I support more software, I think, than I did even just 90 days ago or 180 days ago. And I don't want to argue, am I 10x better, 100x better, 5x? I think those are kind of sort of management conversations that I'm happy to have as well. But from an individual programmer engineer standpoint, I do feel like the removal of the software coding practice makes me less of a craftsman and more of a disciplined, to your point, SDLC manager, operator, which does bring more into the physical discipline of problem identification, hypothesis driving, testing my evidence, right? And I feel like I can execute that loop much more quickly. Therefore, I tend to go back into the loop more easily than when I would as an individual programmer when I was just writing software, because I would spend, let's say 6 out of every 8 hours was actually writing code, and maybe 2 was actually purely thinking. And don't get me wrong, you think while you code and you're constantly kind of navigating all that, but actually dedicating hours and hours and hours to the thought of what I'm producing, you kind of opted against that, right? Because we had the whole requirements will evolve, architectures evolve. It's the whole XP and iterative software, but you spent too much time coding and now you don't. So I tend to kind of move where you're headed and what you're thinking there with, I'm more engineering now than I was 6 months ago, less craftsman than I was, maybe less art than I was, and less shaping, so to speak, and more about predictable outcomes. I struggle with that though, because again, I don't ever feel, I never felt like an engineer. I get the purpose and I get the point, but I always felt like a software developer more than a actual engineer. It feels more tradey to me. It felt like more of a trade in a lot of ways.
So I'm going to pull at that because my first job title was a programmer. Technically, it was junior programmer, and then programmer, and then Alice programmer. Those were my first 3 job titles in my first job as I went through different promotions. And I always hated that term. Yes, I've been programming since I was 9 years old. Yes, I love programming. But in my job, I never just programmed. I talked to customers. I elicited requirements. I supported sales. I delivered software. I did many, many more things that were outside of just programming. So I wonder, have we had different careers in that respect? So you've been more of the programming side and you like that title. Have you been you mentioned 6 out of every 8 hours coding. I don't think ever in any role I've probably spent that much on average coding. It's been, I fairly soon started my own business and grew that, so I ended up doing sales and marketing and all sorts of other stuff. And then I got into management, so I was spending more and more time managing people. How does that contrast to your career and how you approach that?
I never care. Like the name that's on my labels. So I've been everything from same thing, junior programmer, business starter, CTO. Like I don't really, the title to me has never mattered. It's always been more, and it's always been more to me about finding problems, finding people's pain, and figuring out ways to remediate that. So I have like a very simplistic view. Software should either be useful or fun, right? If it's not useful or fun, I don't really know why I'm spending time on it, right? Like it's either a game or it's something that provides value to somebody. And whether I was a programmer or a lead designer or a QA or a support, there were so many titles. And to your point, there are so many things that a developer, programmer, engineer, whatever does in the support of getting software from the spark that's in somebody's brain to somebody using a mouse or visualize or whatever it is to engage with it, that it never really bothered me so much as to what you called me, as long as I was in the middle of the mix and being a part of what was delivering value. And so when Claude comes along and says, guess what, boys and girls, you're no longer going to be on the keyboard, I'm like, sweet. I don't really care, because the keyboard was never really what I was attached to. I'm a terrible typist, and I have a mechanical keyboard and have for 30 years. And my wife hates it and says it's so loud. So like I'm typing less, which is fantastic. So I do know what you're pulling at. Programmer, very early on, I can remember back in the 90s and early 2000s, was not a derogatory term, but it was a less than term, because like you're just a programmer, right? You're just a keyboard monkey or a keyboard jockey or whatever they called you. But I never identified with it, because I always felt like I was in the middle of the value production business and the pain reduction business.
See,
you know what I mean?
I think that's why I railed against it more, because here in the UK, at least, just being a programmer meant you were a cost center.
Yeah, I get it.
You weren't viewed as creating value. You were a cost center, something to be tolerated and minimized.
I get it.
And certainly, just as I started my career, the focus here in the UK was very much of, how do we reduce these costs? How do we get rid of these programmers? What they do isn't valuable. How can we ship it offshore to somewhere cheaper? And so I think that's possibly why
Makes
I was
sense.
like, well, I don't want to just be somebody that you can replace. I want to be focusing on how do I create value? And again, I'd always position myself as I solve problems.
Yes.
Yes, I normally do it through code.
Yes. Yeah.
Primarily, but it's problem solving.
I had the word fungible. I never had a leader one time say humans are not fungible, right? We're not swappable. We're not cogs in a machine. And yes, I've absolutely worked places where I felt like I was a cost center. And yeah, I've absolutely worked at IT shops where we were not producing value, but then I always kind of aligned and was like, hey, how can I find ways to save the organization money? If I can't increase revenue, how can I reduce expenses? Not human expenses, right? How can I reduce operational expenses? And if I landed in a place where I was not a revenue producing programmer, but I could be a, expense reducing programmer, then that was the value that I went after to go seek, because those were the problems. And so I often ended up working with the finance team, or I would work with the support team. I would work with any team that was experiencing waste and finding ways to reduce waste. And that waste could either be through the reduction of manual operations or the expedition of time and compressing time or whatever it was. Right. So yeah, I do know what you're talking about. I just am one of those, I've never been big on, I don't have a lot of care on some of that. I was going to tell you early on, like nothing's off limits with me, because I really don't get offended very easily. Takes a lot to really annoy me, I guess. I'm the first child, so my younger brother really tested me as a young child. And so I really don't get offended or annoyed very often. So, but I know where you're going, and I completely get it.
I know that feeling. So the cost reduction is something that, again, a lot of social media hype we don't see mentioned enough. That can be incredibly valuable.
It's huge.
Yeah, I was in a role about 10 years ago now where we were doing some AI work. And the overlooked thing in all the hype about AI these days is that the big driver of a lot of advances in AI recently has been scale. We have a lot more compute, we have a lot more data, and data is incredibly expensive. And one of the cost reductions that I found with my team was that we could build some tools that made collecting the data a lot quicker and cheaper, so in effect enabling crowdsourcing the data. And that cut the cost of getting data from hundreds of thousands of dollars per data set to tens of thousands of dollars per data set. That makes a massive impact on the
It
bottom line of
does.
the business. Not necessarily reducing costs, but getting much
Mm-hmm.
more data. And the scale of your data enables the scale of your AI. So it can have a huge benefit looking even at those cost reductions. And I think a lot of executives, and I think this is particularly bad in the UK, miss that we can create a lot of value that way in a business without necessarily displacing people. But that brings us to another subject that I think you're quite passionate about. Most people, I think, come into this career assuming that their boss or their company is responsible for their career development
Mm-hmm.
and that their company is going to develop them. Who do you think is responsible for your career?
You know, I'm a self-directed person. It's no secret if you've read anything I've written on social media or on my blog. I do believe that an individual is responsible for what an individual does with their time. I think Gandalf may have had a line about that in Lord of the Rings. That's pretty appropriate. So while I 100% agree that or believe that there are places that you, me, somebody else are not a good fit for, I 100% believe that talent can be squashed. I've seen it happen. I've seen managers and leaders purposely not allow the growth of individuals. That happens. People are people at the end of the day. But I think it's your responsibility, if you desire to have whatever it is you desire to have out of this industry, you've got to take charge of it. And that may mean anything from knowledge acquisition, finding mentors, finding peers, whatever it is. If I firmly believe that if you want it, you got to go get it, because nobody's going to give it to you. And I think in certain spots, it's even worse, because I do believe that there are places that, again, conditions are not ripe everywhere. And it's hard to find some of those good conditions. And when you do, I think you've got to take advantage of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. One of the things I've often told people that I've been working with and mentoring and coaching is that nobody else is as invested in your career as you are.
Absolutely.
And even the best manager in the world, even when I've managed people, I like to think I've been a good manager to them. But I'm still getting up in the morning thinking, what's happening to my career? What's happening with my kids?
Mm-hmm.
What's happening with, other things are going on in my life? Where's this project at? And even if I really care about them, I've got all these other competing things that I care about that are
Absolutely
drawing attention. So I'm never going to be, despite hopefully being a good manager, as invested in their career as they are. So they really, we, each individually need to take ownership of our careers and own it and drive it forward and create for ourselves the opportunities that we want. Part of that is finding good mentors, you should just mention. So what's your advice on how to go out finding a good mentor?
It kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation about influencers to some level. I think you've personally, if I was looking, and I'm about to be 47 years old, so I'm okay to share that. It's life happens fast. I still have mentors. I have people that I bounce things off of. I've got a network of probably 6 or 7 people that I really, really trust, who I've either known for 3 years, upwards of 30 years. So just because you're starting out or whether you're 50 years old, I think it's important to have somebody that's in your corner that can show you the mirror and put your face in front of that mirror and say, this is what you look like. This is how you're presenting. This is how you're missing or where you could be doing. And so if I was out looking for something like that, I would be evaluating based upon, does this person have knowledge and experience in the area that I'm looking to go down, or do they have skills or capabilities that I feel like I'm currently deficient in? So I try to make sure that I've got people in my corner that both are They're not all technical. I have people in my corner that are very socially adept, right? Very business adept, very good at certain other aspects. Because I think to be in the industry, you can't just be a programmer, an engineer, a developer. You've got to be, like we've talked about, capable of speaking. You've got to be able to read and comprehend very well. You've got to be able to communicate problems and communicate solutions. So I would be looking for people that are either close by that I have easily access to, or I'd be reaching very broadly and trying to find somebody that like I admire that's out on the internet and reach out and take your shot. I've had this conversation with several people, and like, the worst somebody's going to say to you if they reached out to John and said, "Hey, John, I don't know you, but I followed you for a year and I think you're fantastic. And I really appreciate how you have A, B, C, D, E, F." Be very tactical and specific about why it is that you're reaching out to this person. And say something along the lines of, "I know that you probably have a million things to do, but I would just love for 30 minutes of your time just to pick your brain about how it is you did what you did." And the worst thing that you're going to say is, "Man, I'm super flattered, but no, I don't have time right now." And no is not the end of the world, right? And in 6 months, unless John tells you to go pound sand, reach back out to John in 6 months and say, "Hey, John, I reached out to you 6 months ago. I still really admire you. I would love 30 minutes of your time." And continue to kind of be active in how you go out and do that. And that's a really long-winded answer, but I think it's a lot like how you find friends in the world. You show vulnerability, you be transparent, you humbly ask for somebody's guidance. And then when that person gives you 30 minutes of your time, you work like heck to make sure that you show them that it was a valuable investment on their end. Because nothing's worse from a mentor standship to work with somebody who doesn't carry the ball forward, right? Like, I'm giving of myself and I happily will do so, but I want to work with people that are willing to help themselves.
So there's so many things I want to pick up on there. Firstly, skills. Yeah, mentors are a great way of developing them. And I think one thing that so many people forget is that they think they've got to have one mentor.
Yes.
Whereas your mentor can be skill specific. You can have multiple. You can have different mentors for different skills. And you can change over time. You can work with a mentor for one specific issue and then move on to somebody else, maybe come back to that mentor as you've grown and reached kind of the next level that you can work with them. Then the others on the reach out. How do I phrase this? How many people do you think reach out to me like that every day in the way you've described?
So I always go low or high. I would say one or two, or I would say a 700.
So I'm afraid neither is right. I get precisely 0 day that reach out how you suggested,
right?
In that well-structured and good approach. And I probably get 10 or 15 a day that reach out with anything from what you're working on, would you be my mentor, to a really specific, detailed question about whether or not they should use this JavaScript framework or that JavaScript framework or something.
Interesting.
Of which, the answer is, well, it depends. There's so much in all that, and how you pick the framework has a lot. And I'm not the person to ask about your JavaScript framework, or it might be a Swift framework or something else. So nearly 0 of them are ones that I can actually usefully respond to. So at the risk of encouraging people to reach out to every single influencer or person they respect, if you reach out like that, you will be unique. You will be standing out. And I think there is a good chance that you're going to get a good response because so few people do it well.
I've had probably, I'm going to say less than 10 that have reached out like that. and I have talked to every one of those. And I happily, and if you're willing to help yourself, I think there's something extremely endearing about that. And I think, again, like I'm writing something right now that really community and reflecting on 30 years in the industry. I look back on the people that invested in me, and I look back on the people that when I was 24 years old and trying to crack in, and I came out during the .com bust. So when the entire internet bust, because Y2K and all that mess. And I remember how bad it was. But I still had people that were willing to work with me. And then along the way as managers and leaders, the same thing. Yeah, I just think it's endearing if you reach out with purpose and you're willing to put in some work. And again, I'm not saying that everything you, me, or somebody else says is gospel. And I'm wrong a lot. I'm probably wrong more than I'm right. But at the same time, I think when you find those relationships, and I love what you said about having different mentors for different things, because it does matter. And it takes a team, and it takes a group of people to get you where you want to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And likewise, if I had people reaching out like that, I would find it hard to say no, because they've made the effort, they've put in the investment. And I also know that everybody I have ever mentored, I have learned at least enough from it to make it worth my time. Sometimes to make it having been worth far more than my time. There are times, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I mentored a very junior developer year into their career. I probably got more out of that than they did from what I learned and from some of the questions that they may have felt were stupid, that made me go away and reflect on something and think about it and change my mind. So every single time I mentor somebody, I have got at least value for my time out of it, sometimes multiples of that.
Well, going back to our very first question on influencers, if I reach out to an influencer, somebody that's out there, and I don't at least get a respectful reply, depending upon how it's responded, that's a data point, right? Like, I don't expect everybody that I reach out to or talk to or say, hey, you can perfectly say, I would love to. I'm flattered. Thank you. I do not have time right now. That is 1,000% an okay response. And if you get that from somebody, it's not rejection. It's not you're terrible. I promise you that person just has a million things going on and they want to dedicate the space and time that you deserve for what they're working on. If I get anything separate from that, it's a check in the box of maybe I don't want to pay attention quite as much to what's going on over there. Because again, I just believe that even though it's a global distributed network of people, the humanity in tech, it's always been about people, and tech has always been about people. It's become something different in certain sections. But at the end of the day, if I can't walk up to you at a conference and say, hey, I've been following you for 5 years. This is fantastic. This was one of the best talks I've ever heard. If you can't turn around and give me a 10, 15 second, thank you so much. I got to run, but I really, really appreciate that. Let's try to connect online. I mean, you have a chance. I mean, I just feel like there's a responsibility there. Again, you're the one putting yourself out socially. I'm doing this because I desire connection and I desire to have dialogue and I desire to learn and grow just like you desire to learn and grow. If I'm doing it to get clicks or I'm doing it to get engagement, then you're back to what we talked about in the beginning. Maybe that's not quite where I want to be paying attention.
Well, I'm going to throw a note of caution out there. Beware on LinkedIn that I get so many messages on LinkedIn and its DM thing is awful.
It is.
That I spend my life apologizing to people that I haven't noticed their message.
Totally fair.
So, yeah, reach out if you can via any other way than LinkedIn.
Totally. It is a mess.
Find a way that's not going to get lost in the noise.
I try to tell people if I get something, quick escape hatch. Here's my email. So jump out of the LinkedIn DM world, because it is, I really wish they'd spend more time on that feature. And we could probably spend an hour helping them design a better DM experience.
Yeah, and because, again, I unfortunately get a lot of people that just connect and think that they can sell me their product. So just filtering out the noise of all those so I can see the messages of people that are trying for a genuine connection is quite a chore.
It is.
It is. Maybe that would be a good way they could actually use AI to filter out the messages.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of trying to get us to use AI to write our posts and comments that they were shoving down our throat for a long time.
I want some AI that can bubble up actual signal and filter out noise. Yeah, would be pretty easy.
Show me the people that sent a message that's bespoke to me in my inbox, not that sent me yet another, hey, we're an outsource company. Do you have any software development needs?
or would you like guaranteed leads for your consulting business? Therefore, I promise you we'll close X, Y, and Z in the first 90 days.
Yeah. Well, the ones I get, congratulations on the massive growth of coding challenges. You've been hiring so many staff. Can we help you hire the next 20?
I like that.
I haven't hired any staff in the whole of the last 3 years, so. Yes.
Your data's wrong.
Yes. So all those, unfortunately, I mean, I do miss a lot of genuine messages there, which is really frustrating, because one of the things that I seek from putting myself out there is that people to reach out with connections. There are so many amazing people that I can learn from, that when they reach out, I do learn things, but I miss some of those because of the spam you get there, which is very frustrating.
It's difficult because, like, I don't have in my neighborhood a collection of people that are in my industry that I can talk to about I mean, I have a TV installer that lives next to me. I have a guy that's in finance next to me. I have teachers, right? I have other trades and other skills that are next to me. If I go to a dinner party with my wife, nobody's talking about, the challenge of AI and tech and that sort of thing. So doing it online is kind of the way that we're able to have and exchange these ideas and have these dialogues. And the tooling doesn't always support that for those of us that are wanting to engage. We've been doing it for years. I mean, bulletin boards and Usenet, and I mean, IRC, and you go Discord and whatever it is now, right? Hacker News. I mean, there's so much out there. But yeah, I just can't go next door and have these conversations, which is why I have them online.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, spam learned a lot of those as well, didn't it? Bulletin boards just got buried in spam and all sorts of other things. So we talked a lot about mentoring and how that can help. And we've talked about being a programmer versus software engineer. We talked about different roles, and we both sort of mentioned being in cost centers. It kind of implies that we've been in companies that are very different to the traditional career that's talked about widely on social media, which is the big tech career.
Right.
Which, one of the things that I pointed out when I started this podcast was only 1% of software engineers work in big tech. There's this kind of hidden, silent 99% majority who don't work in big tech. So do you think it's possible to have a good career in tech outside of the big tech bubble?
I have a great life. I've had a great life. I look forward to hopefully another 30 years of great life. And all of that has been funded and produced by non-big tech. I interviewed with Amazon in 2003. That was my only big tech experience. I went through 8 interviews with them. And I had a company in Chicago offer me a job after one interview. I went to the company in Chicago because they were willing to hire me and take me on, versus the 8 interviews that wanted a 9th interview in Amazon. And it probably would have been a fantastic experience. That was a great time in Amazon, I would imagine, as they were building. But I believe that you can have a fantastic career, very fulfilling, very meaningful, very financially rewarding, without chasing the West Coast of the United States. If you want that, right? Like, absolutely. Like, if that's your dream and you want to work on those projects and you want to work on those things, fantastic. You can still work on large scale. You can work on big volume. You can work on all kinds of things in the Midwest of America, in the East of Asia, in the UK. There's all kinds of places that I think you can find fantastic work that comes at a much easier barrier of entry, with, I would argue, even a little more stability. And again, right now things feel extremely volatile, but volatility is happening in a lot of these big volatile companies. I have friends that have had the same jobs for years in the same organizations that aren't experiencing the same kind of volatility that you see that's happening in social media. So my answer is unequivocally yes. I've had this conversation with several recruiting friends of mine. People are always looking for those big flashy jobs, which, again, I love my friends that work at AWS, Facebook, and people that have gone out there. But man, they go through a lot of hoops and it looks like a lot of work. And living in, Northeast Texas and my little bubble has been fantastic. I don't know how you feel, but that's my general take on it.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, I live several thousand miles away from from Silicon Valley, so that's kind of a blocker to start with. I only live 90 miles from London, where a lot of big tech has UK offices. But I don't want to go and work in London. I don't want to be in a city all the time. I'm in the countryside. I can take my dog out for a walk at lunchtime and in 150 meters be out in the country, in grass and hills. That's the lifestyle I want. And I've long had a passion for AI. AI is why I got into software engineering, or programming really, 49 years ago. 40 years
Mm-hmm.
ago, sorry. And I've managed to have a career where I've touched on AI. My first bit of AI was in 1996, 97. Used it again in the early 2000s, again in kind of 2010s. Shipped AI products that we sold to Apple and Facebook back when it was Facebook. So I've been able to do a lot of the things I want to do, explore the interesting areas, be involved in startups outside of big tech. There are plenty of good, interesting careers you can do. Some of them maybe not as lucrative, don't pay as well, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper to live where I do. You don't need to make that kind of money if
Right.
if you don't live in some of these, if you don't live in London, if you don't live in San Francisco or in the Bay Area, the cost of living difference makes quite a difference
expensive
as well. So
yes,
there's a balance to be found, and I think for me it's the countryside and the dog and going for a walk at lunchtime with the interesting work.
Well, it really depends on what you're after, and I think that one of the things I've always enjoyed about technology is that you can work very backwards to forwards, right? If you can kind of pace yourself from where you want to be and line yourself up and build your plan against your destination. If your destination is to work for one of those, fantastic. And there's absolutely nothing in the world wrong with them. But if you're oriented around something else, walk in the park, countryside, walking your dog, having a slower pace of life, you can absolutely still be right in the middle of some very interesting tech problems with the pace of life or the things that you desire. I play a lot of golf. I played golf through college. That's been my thing. I would have been a professional golfer had it not been for injury. And that would have been what I'd rather have done. And I like to orient my life and my days and my family's life. We spend a lot of time doing that. I live in a part of Texas where I drive my golf cart to the golf course 4 or 5 days a week. And that to me is more important than any quote unquote work experience that I might pick up somewhere else. So I would agree with you.
I don't understand the golfing.
Totally fine.
I'm with I'm trying to remember which famous person said that golf is a good walk with the wind.
There's a famous golf book called A Good Walk Spoiled, and it is about how I walk around the golf course. It's miserable. It's the most miserable game that that was invented. But I do it 4 or 5 times a week.
Cool. So one more thing that I want to talk about is I saw you wrote recently that about AI. The skills that make good leaders actually make good programmers when boosted by AI. Because working with agents is like working with team members when you do it right. You spend more time navigating, coaching, leading, thinking, directing than you do keyboarding.
Yeah. It's been interesting for me. I've been a traditional application programmer, developer, engineer for years. I've kind of made my bread and butter on APIs, web apps, data-driven applications, whether that's been building SaaS companies or whether that's been building internal software, right, to support different organizations. So my experience with AI has not been it was never anything I was interested in. It's never been something that's fascinated me. It was something that as it started to kind of boom, really kind of was yeah, I don't know. I'm also a big photographer. I like to write real creative things, right? Where I still feel like the humanness is very important, right? The guitar in your background, I can pick out Jimi Hendrix. I can pick out Van Halen. I have an affinity toward the producer of an art. And so I started to really think about this for a while, and I wrote something about it in line with it. I'm not buying software because it was coded by John or Ben or somebody. Who wrote the software is not nearly as emotionally attaching as an Eddie Van Halen record or a Jimi Hendrix record. I don't have that same emotional connection to it. So I started to explore Claude. I don't know, it was probably last summer. And the more I started to engage and the more I started to work with it and the more I started to kind of build around it, I started kind of developing my own little patterns and ways to work and build and navigate, managing context and managing priorities and having multiple threads running. And then as it's evolved to where it is today, and then I started noticing, so I consult with 2 or 3 companies right now, and all three are in different stages of their engagement with AI. And one's probably like a 300-400 person company from a technology standpoint. So there's good number of developers in there. Some are having really good success. Some are really struggling with it. Company over here, same kind of thing. Some having good success, some were struggling. I started to notice some patterns. And the patterns began to be that the people that could articulate their problem, could navigate different work streams, could balance different development threads happening at multiple times, manage the quote unquote SDLC of those threads, seem to do better than the ones who were just like throwing prompts at the AI over and over and over and over and over. And I started to kind of think about it, and I started to make parallels to looking at leaders that could step back and organize their teams, manage competing priorities, provide clear direction, could provide clear vision, could manage challenges, not get upset about delays and side rails. Those people were having really good success. And so I don't know that it's the right parallel, but in my experience, it feels very similar to if you do a good job at leading teams and can lead deliverables, I think you're going to have an initially really good time with AI right now because it's very, very similar in a lot of regards. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing the same sort of thing, being able to break problems down, communicate effectively, analyze what's on a critical path, what order you should tackle things in. And I guess a lot of that boils down to problem solving and effective communication. All those soft skills that I view as being part of software engineering are so key. And I think that's perhaps the difference that some people are seeing.
It is. And I think it's the skills that you go back to what we talked about earlier, just picking up. And if you take the programmer from the software engineer, you take that discipline. And then there's a subset of leaders too, leader, manager. We could have that dialogue too, but it's like you take really effective leaders who are really good at doing these things. I feel like if you have also strong engineering, developer, problem solving capabilities, good leaders are great problem solvers, right? Like, that, like they're the ones that you really rally around are great problem solvers. And some of them are so good at solving problems that they solve problems and you think you solved it, but they really solved it they put you in the position to solve it and you didn't even realize it. And the same kind of thing applies with AI, and the same thing applies with agentic coding, and the standpoint that I'm coordinating this massive compute capability that is almost as if I had 10s or 20 or 30 software engineers at my disposal, but not just engineers. I have QA, I have analysts, I have all these different capabilities. If you can leverage its ability to help think, plan, coordinate, execute, it's more than just, hey, can you rewrite this for loop for me in a much more efficient way? That's not its purpose. If you can use it more at a macro level and then get it to drive into the detail while you're continuing to progress through whatever it is that you're trying to do from a thoughts process standpoint, I do believe that at this period of time, until it's at a point where it's able to do a lot of that for us, I think it's a superpower to some extent for a subset of developers. And I don't know what that is. I don't know whether it's 2%, 5%, 50%. But if you can manage that thought process, I think it is an accelerant for those types of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that one. We've come to the top of the hour, Ben. So if people want to follow up with you, get in touch, how's a good way for them to get hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm all in on LinkedIn. So you can find me at Benjamen Pyle on LinkedIn. I've got a blog that you can follow at binaryheap.com. Best way to reach out is either comment on something, DM me. I'm pretty good. Same thing. I kind of have to cull through all of that, but you can follow me in those two places. And I'm happy to engage. I look forward to chatting with people. And so if you're interested and just either want to share and talk shop, or you want to challenge something I said, just reach out. And I'm happy to have a dialogue. And that may mean a video chat and jumping on a quick Zoom, or it could just mean transferring over email. So
awesome. Cool. Thanks very much, Ben. We'll stick the links in the show notes so if anyone wants to follow them and click on them, save typing them up. Thank you very much for being on the podcast, Ben.
Thanks for having me. This has been fantastic.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Coding Chats. If you did, please like and subscribe. And feel free to check out these other videos on a similar topic.